About 5 years ago, we did some episodes of DLC talking about women in video games, why video games need feminism, as well as talking about the increasing demand for games featuring positive representation of the LGBT community, people of color, things like that. So today, we will revisit these topics and see what strides the industry has made, if any, in the years since we did these episodes. Listen in as we talk about this next on Downloadable Content. Hello everyone, welcome to Downloadable Content. I am Brian, and with me we have Ronny.
Hi.
We have Shanna.
Hello.
And we have Dejah. Welcome back.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
It's been a while.
It has.
Glad you came back. Good. I didn't scare you away.
If I have a chance to rant about stuff, I'm going to.
That's exciting.
Anytime anyone has an opportunity to exercise their inner Lewis Black on this show, that by all means.
I kind of did that at the end of the last episode.
just a bit. So, yes, and this is another Ronless episode. So, yes, Ronny, you'll gain another one.
One more point. I'm up to what? I need 74?
72.
72. Look at that. Even better, and then I can catch up.
But yes, we're going to be taking a look, seeing the state of the video game industry, what's happened in the last 5 or so years since we did these episodes that I stated in the intro. But before we dive into the discussion at hand, just want to remind everyone out there that every single episode of Downloadable Content can be found on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, as well as our website, dlcpodcast.com. You can check out our recording schedule. Let us know if you want to be in on an episode. Give us ideas for future episodes, or you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Downloadable Content on Facebook, at DL Content on Twitter. All the different ways to get downloadable content into your ears. Take that as you will. All right, ladies and jelly spoons, let us dive in. So, Season 3 and Season 4, which feel like a billion years ago now, we did a few episodes. All of you were present on those episodes talking about the video game industry and, talking about why we need more representation of women, people of color, LGBT. Because the video game industry then, and still largely now, is very, very male-dominated. I mean, just even here on Downloadable Content, we've been doing this 9 years. Most of our episodes tend to be sausage fests. I would love to get more women on, balance it out a bit.
I'm trying to get on more. I'm trying to help you with that.
Thank you. Dejah as well.
My issue is if I haven't played a game, or like Ronny will be like, I'm going to watch the 5 hours of E3 stuff so I can talk about it. And I'm like, I don't want to watch 5 hours of E3 stuff.
I totally get it.
I can't.
I totally get it. But
well, at least on this episode, you have a wide range of you have 50-50 gender balance here. You have queer people. You have people of color. You have a very nice diversity of people.
Which is nice.
Which we should reflect in video games, right?
That is true.
Which is nice. I don't usually have this for an episode of Downloadable Content, so I'm very glad that we have this group here to talk about.
At the very least, this episode should have that.
You'd think that, yes.
You don't want to have, okay, we are going to have 6 straight white males who are going to tell you all about diversity in video games.
I mean, Ubisoft, what?
Yeah.
Shots fired already. But yeah, so we just want to talk about, what strides have the industry made, if any, that we have collectively seen, experienced. I know 5 years ago when we had these sort of discussions, the sort of consensus that we had came to is that the sort of representation that we want to see in video games has been largely spearheaded by indie devs. AAA studios, with the exception of BioWare, more or less, really didn't want to tackle this type of representation for fear of backlash. There's a financial risk there.
I remember, I think it was after the first Dragon Age came out. I remember reading some article that was talking about it was a vocal minority, but like the backlash that, yeah, you can be heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual character, male, female, what have you. There's an option for all of that. And then, the kind of guys that you would expect to complain about that came out and were complaining, and thankfully BioWare was like, yeah, well, bye, don't need you. So that made me happy.
Yeah, BioWare actually...
Good point, we'll take that out.
Yeah. BioWare actually took a pretty solid stance on that, which you don't get from many companies. They usually waffle on stuff like that, and even if they don't change it, they won't. And BioWare, if I remember correctly, his response was basically, yeah, so we don't need you in our fan base, so don't let the door hit you on the way out.
It's not like it's forcing you to be, but just don't date Zevran. Not a problem.
So, yeah, that was excellent.
And it was, and it seemed like, though, at the time, then BioWare followed up with Mass Effect. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed like at the time, though, that sort of representation, even having the option
and Mass Effect, like Dragon Age was a big game. Yes. Mass Effect was a phenomenon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And having that kind of representation in a game that was, Game of the Year, I think. It won Game of the Year for at least one of them, if not 2 of them. Mm-hmm. In a bunch of different publications. So that was a huge thing.
I almost think that those choices that they made in allowing you to have that much inclusivity was a part of the reason why it was a Game of the Year and why it was such a phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
Because it opened up the doors and it made a stand.
Yeah, at that point, it would the companies, and even I remember some interviews with openly gay and black developers who are basically going, yeah, it's going to be a long time before we have a AAA game with like these as leads, just because the bigwigs think that it's going to hurt sales. And I think Mass Effect was the game that showed that not only will it not hurt sales, it can actually give you it can help bring in an entirely new audience.
Absolutely.
It kind of seems like a no-brainer with a game that, like Mass Effect, where there are so many options available to you. Everybody likes something that's customizable where you can, quite frankly, make yourself. Everybody likes to play something where they can put themselves and their essence into an avatar. So for Mass Effect to do that with its main character was almost a very obvious thing of, yeah, the doors are open, everybody's invited, and it was a smart choice because of that reason.
When, like, it seems like it would be an obvious thing, but here's the thing. Representation is never something that you think about when everyone looks like you, because you're represented.
Definitely.
So
absolutely, you're totally right.
And that's not like, this isn't even me being hard or dissing or anything on these people. It's for especially when at that point the world was less woke, And a lot of this was less apparent to a lot of people who were in power, and a lot of them, like, they were raised around white people, they were raised around straight people, and even if I have friends, I try to be aware, I try to be all these things, if you haven't dealt with not being represented in something, you don't think about other people that way. You have to have that brought to your attention.
No, you're totally right on that. That is very, very true.
I mean, just it's something that, you know, something that I have to sort of be cognizant of because, you know, me, I am the default. I am, you know, the straight white guy here. I see myself represented everywhere. So yeah, it's gonna take, you know, when that's
Brian, do you feel singled out here because you are the minority in this podcast?
I don't feel singled out at all.
I was going to say, after knowing Brian, you might be a cisgender heterosexual white guy, but you're not a cisgender heterosexual white guy TM.
Yeah, that's
if you know what I mean.
Okay, I almost spit out my water, Dejah.
well done.
Copyright.
Like, there's a friend of mine. I was shopping for jeans not too long ago, and one of the styles of the jeans, it's a set of Wrangler jeans that's it was billed as a relaxed straight, and my friend was like, "Oh, that's you." Like, okay, I'll accept that.
Did you buy the pants?
I did. So
all right, you're made for you.
I'll accept that, but yeah, I mean, BioWare at, you know, they didn't even like do this, you know, slowly open the door. They just kind of kicked it open because Mass Effect had everything. You could play as, you know, your main character could be female, number one. You have a variety of different options to romance or not, your choice. And it was just great. And it was like playing through Mass Effect, I was thinking, okay, now when are the other AAA developers going to step up? Now, this was, you know, 5 years ago.
Well, I mean, there have been a couple ones before that, because if I remember correctly, Fallout 2, before that, had gay marriage.
I did not know that. Not being a Fallout fan, I did not actually know that at all.
From what this whole thing to me, and when I was looking up all the stuff on this to kind of remind myself and be like, I was going through the games that I'd played and going, okay, one thing I noticed, because I'm an RPG fan, and what I've noticed is there is a stark divide between Western RPGs that tend to be the most inclusive genre if you look at games themselves and big AAA titles, versus JRPGs that honestly tend to be one of the least inclusive genres. There's a couple of examples. You got Barrett and you got Saz from Final Fantasy. You got Fran if you count a bunny girl. But, like, you don't have gay relationships generally. You don't have a lot of strong people of color. About the only thing you get are women, and even then, it's rare that they're the lead.
Ronny and I were talking about the Persona series today when we were, you know, spitballing ideas about this and how they have the dating element, and I love those games. Like, I kind of want to replay P5 right now as I'm talking about it, but the fact that to have an option of not just one gender to play, that's usually only in the, like, remix version that they do a couple years after.
Yeah, they did it once in Persona 3 and nothing for any of the others.
But then even, like, the fact that fans have been saying, hey, would it be possible to have dating options where you could date, like, any of your social links? And that's, like, the number one thing people are kind of looking for it, because, hey, we're fandom, and we gotta ship things. That's what we do. And then there's kind of like shrug.
The two big requests for Persona have always been being able to choose the gender of your main character and being able to have same-sex relationships, which the only game that's allowed you to do either of those was Persona 3 Portable, the remix, where you had a female protagonist, and that was the big thing.
And you can date a robot girl.
Yeah, and that
robot,
rewrote...
So okay, I guess.
Yeah, and that rewrote the social links, but you still couldn't date the girls, with the one exception of the robot girl, because dating her ties into the story of the epilogue, so they left that one in, which left the single same-sex relationship.
And the guys in that game suck. I don't want to date any of them.
Also, you couldn't date her, but you could flirt with Elizabeth, who was the Velvet Room attendant. Mm. But yeah, it's JRPGs are lacking in a lot of ways.
I mean, I get it's Japanese culture, and they're kind of not. I mean, not that we're perfect over here. We're not, we still have a long way to go, but they're generally behind us. Like, I mean...
Well, they have a lot of their own different societal belief systems going on that were
as long as it's before you're 18, you can date a girl if you're a girl, because that's just what high schoolers do. It's not real. I got a lot of thoughts on schoolgirl lesbians.
It's like
anime.
Okay, GLBT issues in anime in JRPGs in Japanese games tend to have their own issues where they get stuck into their own stereotypes. But considering that Japan is 99% ethnically Japanese, means that they people of color. You don't see people of color in there unless they are deliberately creating the setting as outside of Japan.
And usually their representation is pretty stereotypical.
You mentioned Final Fantasy 13. I don't think I've ever been more angry in my life. Let's be brutally honest.
I totally could see that because having played Final Fantasy 13, I kind of felt just playing the game. I'm like, I felt that Saz really was just there as the token character.
The minute I saw Zaz, I mean, for crying out loud, in his fighting stance, he's like chucking and jiving around, and I said, "Did I fall ass backwards into like 1932? What is this?"
What? Yeah.
I mean, it was just listening to him talk and his mannerisms. I said, "All right, I can sometimes let that stuff go." Like, I don't get offended when I see Barrett. I'm like, okay, Barrett is Barrett. He is what he is.
He's
but,
Mr. T.
It's not... He's Mr. T, essentially. Yeah. Exactly. But that was just like, honestly, it's one of the reasons why I have not picked up 13 and continued with it.
You're not missing much.
So I've heard. I've heard there's many reasons. But
here's the sad part. Like, I actually like the story of Saz and his son, and, like, the story they've set up for that character, I really like.
And I'll be honest, I didn't get that far.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just wish they could have implemented it better. His son was taken, like, if you got far enough, you know how you guys were the chosen of the crystals? His son
as you do in Final Fantasy.
Yeah, as you do in Final Fantasy. His son was one of the chosen of the crystals for the other side. So they're on two different sides of the war, but he'll give anything for his son. And, like, so you have that whole thing where he's trying to help his son who's on the other side. It's actually a really sweet story that is marred in some ways.
It's basically, that's all well and great and all, but...
Yeah, the trappings, the way they set him up means that story isn't going to be able to be as meaningful as it should be.
And for me as a person of color, to see him kind of... like, the chocobo popping out of his hair and just some of his mannerisms, I said, I can't. I mean, and I'm normally somebody who can kind of turn that off, depending on the game, if it's not too blatant. But that one really
seemed like he
me.
was more just like, I'm here to be like the goofy guy.
Mm-hmm.
It was borderline minstrel show.
That's what is it going to kind of go with of I'm here to be funny. I'm here to make the white people laugh.
Exactly.
And Barrett, as you mentioned, Barrett had his own stereotypes, but once again, like, the story of Barrett and his daughter, like, that wasn't something we'd gotten in video game.
And the fact of the matter is this. When I look at a character of color in a game and I see their personality traits, there's a moment where I say, could this have been applied to anybody else? And the fact of the matter is, Barrett could have easily been a boisterous big white dude.
Yeah.
For the most part. It's just, I'm like, and the pieces of his personality didn't feel like, oh, he's acting like this because he's the black character. It's like he's acting like this because he's a dude from the slums and because he's had his own rough, tragic backstory. And it's also the first time I've actually seen a person of color represent an environmentalist agenda, which I thought was pretty interesting. But
yeah,
the point was, it wasn't so blatant that I couldn't go on with the character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It wasn't so overboard that I couldn't go on with that character.
Also, like, you could, as you touched on, you can see why his personality is the way it is, and how, like, a lot of it's a defense mechanism, and how he kind of softens as the game progresses.
But the game has to give me a chance to allow me to see that. And I felt like, okay, with 7, I could go in and see that. With 7, I wasn't so put off by Barrett's mannerisms that I was like, I can't handle this. I did feel that way with 13.
I suppose here's a question, and this is just a personal question to you. Do you think it's that Saz is that much worse than Barrett, or do you think it's this many years after and we're still doing this? If you think...
Oh, it's definitely both.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was asking if you think, like, 13 was done at the same time as 7, do you think you would have reacted that way?
Probably not, I'll be brutally honest. And because 7 is there as a precedent, it did feel like a step backwards.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest about that. And I think also we were more forgiving of some of that stuff at the time in the 90s. I mean...
Final Fantasy VII was kind of this oh my god moment in gaming and storytelling, and there's a black guy in 1997 from Japan. That's awesome.
Kind of, yeah. I mean,
like, fast forward, what, like 15-ish years
you're
later.
Not wrong there. It's like, well, at least we're
and it's like,
here.
Okay, like, we should have moved on by this.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
It's like
People
whenever you
who played 7 are now showing their kids 7. Like, we've grown.
Whenever you see representation start, it almost always starts with at least pieces of stereotypes. It shouldn't, but that's when power starts to move in, they'll start with stereotypes, and then slowly they'll start to become actual characters. 7 was that beginning part where, okay, Barrett is a stereotype, but you want to know, we didn't have anything before. And there is positives to his character, even if he is stereotypical in a lot of ways. But it's been 20 years. Like, there's a lot of time in between there that we need to have grown.
And Barrett wasn't the only character in the cast of 7 to have a little bit of a weird, sketchy, race bent to it. I mean, Red 13 kind of has that a little bit too. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of characters in that game with sort of accents and things like that. But at the same time, you also had, at the opposite side of Barrett, you also have Rude, who is another black guy, and he's just there. And he's not like, let's pile these stereotypes on him. He's just a dude who's working for the Turks.
I guess
I was gonna say,
what if thing for him is just that he's smooth. Like, that's, I guess.
I was gonna say,
he's smooth. He's not like Barry White incarnate.
Well, yeah,
there's a difference.
Okay. Let's just wait. You know people like Rude. Like, that's a person. That's
right.
Like, but with Red 13, I mean, that's where you really have we're gonna take our Native American character, and what if we made him a cat?
They literally made him the embodiment of, like, a spirit animal or something.
Yeah.
I'm not my favorite characters, though.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak for anybody, because I don't know if the Native American community sees Red 13 as a positive or negative representation, because I could see it going either way, and I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth. But
Yes.
I think at the very least we can accept that Red 13 is absolutely meant to embody that.
Yes, he is. I mean, for crying out loud, his weapons are basically hair feathers throughout the game. I mean, it's a little bit
Clips or whatever.
This is a little uncomfortable, but again, he's also not like a big fat walking stereotype. He's a character with a deep involved story. So I guess the question is, how do you properly represent culture? And on the flip side, you also want to represent culture correctly, because you also don't want to have a character of color who is completely stripped of their cultural ties, because that's not quite right either.
No, it's like one major thing I think of with representation is, except for when you're making I will say, before I say this, I'm specifically not talking about when you make a protagonist that can be anything, that you can make them however you want.
Yes.
I'm specifically not talking about that when I say this, but when you create a character, that character shouldn't be able to be coded as a male or female, black or white, Asian, and Native American, and it shouldn't be that character. If they could be changed to any of those things and it wouldn't change the character at all, isn't a character. They're a cardboard cutout.
Yes.
What you bring culturally, what you bring from your identities, affects who you are. And yeah, for NPCs that have like 2 lines of dialogue, you're not going to see much of that. But if you're a major character in it, you should be able to see from their background who they are.
I'm going to make another example. So when I think about going back to Final Fantasy VII, the one thing that you can kind of say is that, okay, this is a completely fabricated world. Barrett is probably not living with, with a lifetime of civil rights and slavery behind him. So in a way you can say, oh, maybe you can kind of root that differently, because Barrett is not somebody who is rooted in reality. But then you take something
his character's kind of more rooted in in labor rights. Labor rights and environmentalism is kind of where he came from.
Exactly. But it's it's very self-contained, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's, he doesn't have the root of, his grandfather was, marching at,
he was not, his grandfather's not marching with Martin Luther King.
Exactly. But then you take something like, say, GTA San Andreas.
Yeah, I was reading about that one.
And the thing is that there is a root of truth in that, because that game is fully rooted in Compton and what was going on in the 80s and the 90s, and things that were being brought to life by NWA. And this was a real thing that was happening. And with something like that, you can't rip the culture away, because that is the culture. That is where they came from. And to take that away would be to wash away a certain history that needs to be told and that people need to understand.
Yeah, I find a lot of people, I feel, and this is just from looking at like other fandom things that aren't necessarily video games, but I've been seeing a lot lately on Tumblr, which explains it all, but where people are like wanting representation and AUs, but taking away all the bad stuff. Which, how is
I was about to ask you to go into that, Dejah.
I saw some post the other day that was like, I'm rating a 1950s AU, but not with all that homophobia because I said so. And someone else is like, if that's not self-care, I don't know what is. And then a friend of mine was like, okay, by erasing that, you're taking everything that our brothers and sisters were dealing with and basically saying it doesn't exist anymore. And so you're basically ignoring their struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So that became like a whole thing. But so
it's a very fine line.
Being like, but I want a black person, but none of that like race relations that was going on in Compton in the 80s. That
would be like
problematic.
Writing something in the South in the like early 20th century and not touching on Jim Crow.
I'm not going to deal with slavery. That's sad.
Yeah, that'd be like, playing BioShock Infinite without the blatant racism against the Irish and, people of color. Just like, huh?
That's woven into the fabric of culture.
Yes.
You can't completely erase that either, just to make it a clean, safe narrative. So,
well, that also comes down to just this whole purity culture thing that's starting of like it has to be perfectly problematic, and that's the only thing that I'm gonna like. It's like you sometimes have to deal with difficult issues because they're actually happening.
I think their worry with it, I think we all know their worry with it is they go, well, if we do this narrative and tie these hot button issues into it and we don't do it well, we're going to get crucified. So it's easier to just go, yeah, we're not going to touch on that at all. But that's, as Brian, you and I have both gone through on this, it's because the game industry doesn't like to take risks in a lot of ways.
It absolutely doesn't. But then, speaking of trying to get a fine line between, representation that makes sense versus sanitizing something. We're taking a look at some of the more recent AAA games that have started to include representation of the LGBT community, like Borderlands, Overwatch, other games like Life is Strange.
We're going to be touching.
Just played that one.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Life is Strange as it goes forward. The thing with Overwatch is weird in that you have two canon gay characters, or at least bisexual characters, characters in a homosexual relationship, and like that's awesome. On the other hand, I've seen a lot of people going, well, it's only shown in these side things, not in the game itself, but it's a competitive first-person shooter with no story. Like, all of the story for every character is done through these little side things. So
it's not like it's being dusted under the rug, it's...
Yeah. They're showing it...
incorporated the same way everything else is incorporated.
Yeah, exactly. And I personally think they could have incorporated these into the game itself by, let's say you do so many matches and you unlock one of these little comics or whatever you can see in game, rather than have it released through their website elsewhere. I think that would have been a better way of doing it, but still, like,
my only concern
super positive
is that, and again, I don't really know much about Overwatch. All I see is other people like online talking about stuff, and I would have assumed everybody was bisexual in that because everybody is shipping everybody with everybody, but so I don't know what's real and what's not anymore, but I don't know. My only worry is that the game's been out a couple years and it kind of has that sort of J.K. Rowling Harry Potter smell where it's like, oh, well, we're going to say later that this character has actually been this the whole time just to make people happy. Like, that's my only worry. And that might not be what they're doing, but I don't know. My brain just goes there. Where it's like, oh, the fandom wants this character to be gay. Well, they've been gay the whole time, everybody.
That is a dangerous trap that can easily happen, and I see it happening. I'm sure you do too. With current, with now AAA titles and current gaming, is that it almost becomes a little bit performative. And one example I will make is, we talked about this, I know, previously, but when they announced the new Assassin's Creed game, and it was like, look at this woman, you could play as this woman, isn't this great? And it's like, yeah, but it should have been that way the entire time, and the fact that you're making a bigger deal about this now is kind of detrimental to the point. It's actually proving your point a little bit.
Yeah, it feels a little non-genuine.
It's non-genuine, and it's like, well, are you doing this because it's the right thing to do? Or are you doing this because you know that it's going to line your wallet a bit more and give you cred?
Are you talking about when you get to play as one in the pirate one, or are you talking about Odyssey? Because I haven't played it, but I've heard a lot of good things about how they did it in Odyssey.
I'm talking about Odyssey, and I haven't played Odyssey yet, so they might have done it fantastic. I'm just talking about the trailer when it was released.
Okay, you're
And
talking
the
about
fact
the way
that
they.
It's more the publicity.
It's more
of
the
it.
it's more the way it's presented as look at it, especially after they had the debacle where they didn't show off the female what was it? They couldn't make a female.
It's too hard.
It's too hard to make a female. That whole thing.
Yeah.
And
It's just hard. It's difficult. We have to create new skins or use the ones that are already in the game, and
you have to make new facial expressions, and they have all those
come up with names.
They have all those in and out bits.
names are a problem.
But exactly. But the thing is, when you're making a bigger deal about it, then in a way, it also sort of takes away from that inclusion.
And then you have games
Makes it seem like it's more a
it's like a fad.
Yeah.
Or like here's a little trinket that we've added now with female protagonist.
And then you have games like Life is Strange that treat queerness in a very matter-of-fact manner.
It does. And it's
we
very
literally just
gray in
played
that
it
game.
last weekend, and I'm shook.
I
forced him to stay up with me so I could finish it.
The first one or the
first one. We haven't done Before the Storm yet.
Before the Storm is good.
But I know that.
Actually,
but I know that has
speaking of racial
very
stuff. He was telling me that the new one that's been coming out actually has black character dealing with like police stuff.
Ambiguously brown. I said.
Oh, well,
I don't know if they're actually black or not because I haven't played it yet.
not a white person.
Yeah, it's one of the characters from the original game, but you get a little bit going on.
Is he actually from the original game?
One of them is, but he's like barely in there. He's just one of the dudes that is kind of walking around on campus. And
Oh, because I was gonna say, is he the one who's high all the time?
I think he is the one who's high all the time. Yeah.
Because a little part of me was like, "Oh, cool, black guy." Oh no, he's just high all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, she wasn't a big character, but how awesome was it that the
what was her
hardcore science
Davis,
teacher was black, and we got a black woman in STEM? Like that was awesome.
Who's also
awesome
the whole time, trying to get us to sign the petition and stuff for the surveillance.
Yeah.
Like I really like that teacher. I wish we saw more.
Also,
as opposed to creepy Miss McCreeperson.
Oh, spoiler alert. Also, sidebar, because it's also in a way representation, but we don't have to go into it because it's a whole other can of worms, and it's not. Well, I guess you could say it's identity, depends on the person, but the fact that that character was also not thin was nice, because we don't generally get a lot of body type variety in games.
Yeah. Usually if they have a larger character, they are just there to be the butt of jokes.
And I get that when you're playing an action game, like you know, you're not going to see somebody looking like me being like, "Hi, I'm going to chase after the bad guy. Hold on, guys. I'm exhausted."
Okay, Dejah, let's be honest. If any of those action games, if it was Tomb Raider or if we were Nathan Drake, those games would be over really fast.
Yeah, so
we wouldn't make it through the first level.
But...
We'd go home. We'd have some chocolate.
Yeah, the end.
But like, I don't know, in an RPG, a magic user can have a little extra weight, right? It's just magic.
It's like all you have to do is just stand there and say some words, and there, you're done. just you're done. And
but yeah,
it's another game. I mean, this one we have The Last of Us.
Mm-hmm.
Still haven't played it yet, but
I've heard which made a lot of waves. Because you have
its DLC.
You have its DLC, and also one of the NPCs, which had a very subtle reveal that he was gay.
Okay.
Wasn't he kind of a villain though?
He's got issues. The character build.
And that's not saying that you can't have a villainous character, but usually when we're talking representation, them being the villain usually can be problematic.
Branching off of that, I mean, yes, we're starting to see more representation in AAA games. However, there is still the very common trope, which actually has a title. It's called "Bury Your Gays."
Yep.
You mean Life is Strange?
A lot
You
of
don't have to.
a lot of games still have that. It's like, yeah, we're getting more queer representation, but we're still killing them off.
Yeah, I love everything about how they portray stuff in Life is Strange, how they built stuff, but that doesn't change the fact that one or two gay character or gay or bisexual characters bite the dust in that game.
I love it anyway.
So do I.
I know, but maybe it's because I don't watch enough stuff with that trope. So I was just kind of like, okay, it's a story they were telling.
No, it was a story they were telling, and I think them doing. Okay, here's the thing: their story wouldn't be problematic if it wasn't for everyone else doing it around there as well. But you can't take something out of the context in which it's made.
I think there was a lot going on in that game, though, that I don't know. That game, I feel like, has a lot of questions it asks and a lot of different. One thing I like about that game is there is some gray area. And when I say that, I mean, obviously in the first game, you can define the relationship between your two main protagonists, Max and Chloe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like, ooh, let's go and make them lesbians, because yeah. It's like, okay, maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. It depends on how you play the game. But I didn't go into that game looking for that. I went into that game just wanting to explore their relationship with what it was. And I loved it when it felt like it was a Daria-Jane connection. Like, these are really best friends. And not for nothing, when is the last time you've seen any video game explore friendship between two women? I mean, that's unheard of.
I can't really think of anything. Like, there was this one game I remember from, like, the PlayStation 1 era, but I'm pretty sure that was, like, a more romantic, kind of sexualized two women protagonist.
I think a lot of that, at least early on, came from the fact that they don't explore relationships between NPCs very often, and when the majority of the protagonists are male, you just don't deal with that, because I can think of plenty of male-female friendships being explored. So I think a lot of that, especially with the older games, was just it's the protagonist X whoever for relationships. And now that we're finally getting more female protagonists, we're going to start seeing more female friendships.
Yeah.
But
I hope so.
I hope so too, but I feel like that was the first time I really played a game in a long time, and maybe ever, where I said, I'm just exploring these two and who they are and what they mean to each other and why they're close to each other. And I've never seen a game that really revolved around a female friendship the way Life is Strange did, and then following that Before the Storm. How
naturally they were able to build that relationship. We went the romance route with the two of them, but whether you go the romance route or the friendship route, just how naturally that was built between those characters over the course of that game was just well done to the writers of that game. Like, I have a couple issues with the underlying themes of the game, but the writing in that game is probably some of the best I've ever seen in video games.
It's fantastic.
I'm trying to figure out what they did, because in my fan fiction, I'm always like, how am I going to get these two characters to fall in love in a, quote, month of time? And they made me want them to get together in basically 5 days, even though you could say, well, I mean, with the time stuff, it wasn't, but it was 5 days. And yet I went from going, who the heck is this chick, to, they're meant to be! And I don't know how they got me there.
And see, I felt the opposite way, where I'm like, these two are so close. Like, this is deep friendship. This is ride or die. Like, I got your back, you got my back. And I ended up with Max kind of having a little thing with that dude that likes her. What's his name? Yeah. The cute little one with the floppy hair. Anyways, But my point is,
Science, bro.
Science, bro, yes. But I like the fact that in that game, it felt very gray area. It wasn't trying to, in a way, I feel like it wasn't trying to push you towards one thing or the other. And that makes a big difference because a lot of games will try to push you in a certain direction. And in a way, I think that feeds towards something deeper.
Especially if there's like a morality meter kind of thing.
Yeah, and that can sort of dilute the relationship dynamic because then it just becomes about like, hey, I'm going to make these two chicks get together. And it's like, no, that doesn't help.
If someone was playing it thinking, oh, I'm going to get some hot scenes or something, well, they were clearly disappointed.
They were clearly playing it wrong.
I was going to say, the most you get is 2 kisses, even if you go that route.
Yeah, go that route.
There is no fade to black and
No. We should probably move to another game because I have a feeling this group could talk about Life is Strange the entire podcast.
I said to Ronny, I was like, 4 years, I'm going to get on Brian because he's going to have to do a 10th anniversary one.
I'm signing up for that one right now.
Yeah, we need to get Brian to play Life is Strange.
Yeah, we have to just pencil that in. Like, all right.
But Dejah and I already had the conversation about, we need to get Brian to play Life is Strange, but it's going to end up like Undertale, and we're going to be like, oh my god, it's the best thing ever! And Brian's going to be like, I didn't like it. And we're like, why?
Actually, speaking of...
it's about photography!
Yeah, it's just, like, I remember when everyone was like, Brian, you need to play Undertale, and so I did. I was like, all right, let's see. And I was just kind of like, and... just the backlash, of like, why didn't you think it was the greatest thing ever? Like,
Hey, I like to think I didn't give you that backlash. I accepted it.
So,
people have different taste.
Speaking of Undertale, though, and I know we've kind of been hopping between, different sort of identity topics, but when Ronny and I were talking, I was like, ooh, should I bring up Undertale because that's the only game I've ever played that's had any sort of semblance of a non-binary character.
And you have 2 in it.
And there's a lesbian relationship.
There's a lot of representation in that game. The only thing I can think of that we don't get in that game is people of color, unless you count Frisk as being ambiguously brown, but considering they're all monsters, it's hard to represent one of them as a person of color. Specifically.
Basically. So, I mean, we've been spending pretty much this entire first half talking about the strides that the major developers have taken. I mean, just 5 years ago, like, the bulk of our discussions was like, BioWare the end.
Well, now it's BioWare asterisk. Like, there's I still feel like there hasn't been a huge leap and bound, but they're
it's only been 5 years, and
slowly getting there.
Like,
we've named 2 or 3 of the biggest games in the last 5 years that have had those things. I mean, Last of Us is arguably the biggest game in a decade.
And The Last of Us, we talked about the trailer recently that was released at E3. And I feel like that was probably one of the most realistic ways I've seen 2 women who are in a relationship interact in a game, where they were people and they were talking and they're obviously attracted to each other, but they were 2 people who, like, it was 2 young girls who like each other just as much as you would see a guy and a girl in any traditional quote unquote medium where it's like, oh, that crush is starting or whatever, And I said, wow, I'm seeing this trailer at E3 right now. This wouldn't have been here 5 years ago.
No. Absolutely. So,
little things like that are strides, I'd like to think.
Oh, and
especially considering all this stuff is in for the most part, the post-Gamergate world.
Right.
Where we haven't even touched on that yet, because that was not a thing when the last podcast happened, if I remember correctly.
No.
I think it was happening.
What year that was.
Was it just happening at that point?
It was happening at that point, from what I remember.
But, I mean...
Because that's definitely created that's basically created an equivalent of the alt-right Tea Party in the video game sphere. And it's it has not gone away. It is still there, and it is pushing people to take sides when they weren't before. And I think, against maybe what they're trying to do, it is made the politics of this whole thing of diversity in video games much more aware. It made the general public much more aware of it. And I think that worked to their detriment, because I think the general gaming public became more accepting of it.
Accepting of diversity, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And well, here, I mean, you have something like Gamergate, and these pitiful, half man babies, screaming that, SJW. Well, I'm like, well, just go away. Number one, there's life outside your apartment. I know it's hard to conceive, and spite is one of the greatest motivators on the planet. You get such a backlash to the anger of those Gamergate idiots, and then you have, yes, there are obviously, we had some women being chased from the industry because of all of the threats and the targeted attacks. At the same time, you have this influx of people who want to get into the gaming industry to write these stories, to give representation, be like, okay, fine, you're gonna play like that? Well, this is what I'm gonna do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reaction.
Yes.
It's them trying to silence these Gamergate kids.
Absolutely. And the whole issue with the Gamergate thing, and this isn't even, people being chased from the industry, people being threatened, all the rest of it. The issue with stopping the whole Gamergate thing was you have the two factions inside of it, where you have a group of people who legitimately have an issue with journalism and gaming, and they're going about it the wrong way, but they do actually feel that way. And they go, well, it's just a very minor group that's doing this, when it's not. They don't see the issue clearly, and they are giving legitimacy to a group of people who don't deserve legitimacy. And they're basically covering for these people because they think it's one or two people who are doing this, not seeing the bigger picture. And I had a couple friends who were like that it took quite a while for me to get them to understand what was actually going on. And it's because it's, like we were talking about with the people earlier, because for a lot of people, it's hard for them to see outside of their own space and understand something when it's not something they've never experienced. And they go, well, of course there's a reason for this, because why would people act this way? I mean, obviously, there's no issue with women in gaming. Look, Lara Croft. It's not a thing.
It's funny, I just had this conversation with somebody the other day, and the comparison I draw is somebody coming up to me and saying, but racism is over, right? Because the civil rights happened.
Mm-hmm.
Or we had a black president, therefore.
Yeah, we had a black president, so there's no such thing as racism anymore. And
anybody who thinks that should immediately be slapped after our current president.
But the point is, sometimes it's very hard for people to see outside their little bubble, and the bubble can be very convenient. And you have to sort of bring about, no, this is what's really going on, and there's deeper things than just what you're seeing. And no, racism isn't just crosses burning on somebody's front lawn. There's a lot more levels to it. And it's sort of the same thing here. It's sort of the same thing with this women in video games sort of debate, is that there's a lot more going on than, oh, look, they put a female in a video game, so it's all okay now. There's still more that needs to be done here. There's still more that needs to be talked about.
Yeah. Often my sort of stance on stuff is, let's celebrate steps that we have made, and then also look at what more steps we have to take.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Instead of, like, this isn't necessarily games, but when the Supreme Court said, yeah, gay marriage is fine, like, it's legal now, like, rock on. There were some people, I remember at the time, probably a couple of my friends on Facebook and whatever, who were like, I don't see why everyone's getting so excited about this, because, like, there's still so many problems, and what about this, and what about that? And I'm sort of like, okay, this is one of the few chances we get to be excited about something. Let's celebrate it, and then go, this isn't the end.
Yeah, celebrate for a week and then get back to work doing the hard work that needs to be done.
This is still a big deal. Probably should have been a while ago, but this is progress.
I was going to say...
Not done. It's not like, I guess homophobia is gone forever now.
I was going to say, when the Voting Rights Act was enacted, people were excited, but that didn't mean that a couple weeks later you didn't have marches about the other issues that we had. Like, you can be excited about something. That doesn't mean that you're not gonna go back and do what needs to be done. And in the to bring it back into gaming, we still got a lot that's got to be done, and I think we're going to be talking about that in the second half, Brian.
Oh, we absolutely are. We absolutely are, because I also said, we said at the beginning that 5 years ago, AAA studios were looking at these issues and going, we don't want to touch them. Now some of them are, but very, very, very incrementally, baby steps. Indie games.
I think most of the big video game companies have put at least something out that touches on these issues. I other than maybe Madden.
Well, yes. But
and I say Madden, not EA, because
they're taking baby steps. Queer baiting is still a very huge problem.
That is true.
Yes, it is.
It's so we'll touch on that. We'll also talk about going forward. So we're gonna close.
I was gonna say there's one other thing. I just wanted to make sure I did a shout out to it. I don't want to clog up the second half with it. Ronny's probably gonna make fun of me for this, but I wanted to. All right, so you know how sometimes when it comes to having a person of color, having a female character, an LGBTQ character, what have you, sometimes it's like, well, like, that's hard. How are we going to put that in or whatever? So, I don't know if any of
no
you
excuses
played
after this, because I know what Dejah's talking about.
Yeah. So, I love the game. Like, I love South Park. I still do. People are like, that game's or show's still on. I'm like, yes, it is. Shut up. It's awesome. I think it was the end of 2017, they had their game, The Fractured But Whole, come out. And it was around the time where some of the show stuff was, they had a new principal named PC Principal, and he was making everything PC. I'm not going to get into that. But so part of the game is you filling out your like character sheet, because they're superheroes and stuff. So you can have your race and nationality, you can have your sexuality, your gender identity, all of this stuff. And at different points in the game, the Counselor Mackie calls you back to talk about it.
Oh, by the way, one thing. Before you go into Mackie, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
This went around the internet, but we would be remiss not to mention the difficulty slider, which is your race. What is your skin color? That is your difficulty slider. And if you choose black, it goes, don't worry, it doesn't affect combat, it just makes everything else in your life more difficult.
As in, you get less money from every fight and stuff like that.
Wow, that hurts.
It's real though, right? And I didn't, because we played a little black girl in it, and I didn't know there was any different until I read, but if you play a white character, you get more money and stuff. And I was like, oh man.
And they set how much less money you get off of what the current
color of your
statistics
skin
had said. Well, no, they did it off the current statistics for how much less black people.
I thought it was like, if you're a lighter skin, it's not as bad as a darker skin color and all that kind of
stuff. Well, okay,
yes. That's a whole nother issue within itself.
Yes, it is. But I love that they did that. Like, that was, like, It's
I
so
felt like it
true.
was a way to put it in there and kind of, like, I don't know, the people who already know would be like, yep, yeah, that's real. Like, I'm looking to get away from reality in games. Why are you putting it back in there? But
Well, it's South Park doing what South Park does best, which is put something that's extremely poignant in something called fractured butthole.
Exactly. we got to play our little black trans girl. That's what we played for our character, and we're totally in love with her.
Pansexual trans girl. I love her now. She doesn't have a name, but anyway. So the first time you go to Mackie's room and he talks to you about, what was it at the time? I think it was just your gender, or he calls it like your gender identity, and it only gives you a couple options. So you can have boy, girl, and cis or trans. So later, a couple hours later in the game, he calls you back and he's like, I was just told that sexuality and gender is a lot more complicated than that. So we have a bunch more questions. When I was playing more recently, so anyway, you get to answer a couple questions, and then it says, like, this is what your thing is this correct? So I was curious, and I started playing around with it, and if you say no, it then gives you all of the potential choices to go through. And I think it was for gender, there were 30 choices, and for sexuality, I think there was 15 or 20. Now, granted, it doesn't really have anything to do with the story, because whatever you pick, like, they had two-spirit in there. I thought that was cool. When you leave, at the time, a bunch of rednecks show up and try fighting you to go like, oh, there's, whatever you ended up.
There's that black transgender girl.
But here's the thing. They do that no matter what. So if you come out, there's that cisgender heterosexual boy. Let's get him.
But they don't know
what
the
they
word
have no clue what they're saying. Like, they don't know what any of the words mean, so they fight you anyway.
I'm telling you,
and
South
that
Park
right
is very
there,
good
I
at
think, is
that.
funny.
Yeah, it's a bit of real legitimacy and bringing awareness to something in a way that's so heightened,
that's over the top,
and comical. But it's so true.
If you've never played Fractured Butthole, you really should. It's excellent.
It's fun.
It's on my bucket list.
Okay.
I will drive to New York and play with you.
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
You can go to part 2 now.
I can cut to intermission now. All right. So now that we've
now everybody, I would like you to take your cassette out of your player, flip it over to side B, insert it back in, and press play. And we are going to have a couple minutes of music for you to enjoy before we come back.
When did DLC become a book on tape?
Technology is cyclical.
In the event that next you're going to have, when we come back, DLC is going to be on Betamax. Just you wait. So
it's retro. It's cool.
It's in a clamshell case, mind you.
Yes, absolutely.
That's vaguely turning yellow.
DLC on 8-track. All right. Enough shenanigans. We'll take a break from these shenanigans and have more shenanigans on the second half. So you're listening to downloadable content for inclusivity's sake, people. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Madcap Madness that is downloadable content, talking about inclusivity in video games. We're all still here. We haven't gone anywhere. As far as I can tell, anyway.
Still included in this podcast.
Yes, with 100% more Shanna. It sounds like it's a cereal box toy. You'll find it.
I would totally be one of those spoons with the straws on it.
I want to be one of the Burger King or McDonald's toys. You know, like the little Koopa that with the legs that would move.
Little magic.
Or one of those Barbies with like the one piece of hair sticking out of it that you could brush.
I liked those.
I liked those too.
Dragging ourselves back into the discussion, talking about inclusivity and representation in video games and the strides that the industry has made. We've sort of established in the first half that yes, the industry, particularly the big developers, have made some strides in the past 5 years. It would seem that it's been hit or miss, but there has been progress made. I mentioned in the intro that the bulk of having different representation has and still is being spearheaded by indie developers, which makes me want, we mentioned this years ago as one of the, quote unquote, potential solutions on how we get more representation, is that these big studios should hire writers who are people of color, people who are queer, vary it up a bit. But you find a lot of representation still to this day in indie games. One of them I've mentioned before, and I'll bring it up again because I think it's an excellent example, is It's Gone Home. I don't know if any of you have played that.
I still haven't played that.
I haven't played it.
And I was going to say, Dejah and I were talking about it. I know quite a bit about it, but I also have not actually played it. I do know what the premise of it is, and I've seen
it. There's also a game called Night in the Woods.
Yes. Night in
Ronny's
the Woods
been watching a Let's Play of that.
It's so good. It's too. I had to stop after playing Life is Strange because Life is Strange had gotten all of the realness out of me, and I had no realness left, and the game was too real for me. I had to stop Night in the Woods for a couple days.
Which I heard about this game, and I took a look at it, just reading up on it. And seeing that it was praised for its portrayal of mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes,
it is something that is it is something that I want to play because I have not played it, because I love, and this is one of the reasons why I love indie games so much. They go so far out of the box. Like, they like to tackle things that the big guys won't. Like, mental health? Okay. I like games that, while I personally don't suffer from things like depression or anxiety chronically, it's nice to see that, hey, there are developers out there and writers out there who are tackling these issues, because these types of things should not be something that should be swept under the rug.
I mean, there's a whole genre of empathy games at this point, but usually they aren't huge sellers, so it's kind of nice to see when something hits it really big that also deals with something.
So that dragon
explores something that's a little more exploratory of real things. Because sometimes that lets people process them.
Another great example of that is Stardew Valley, which, if no one's played it, it's sort of... I like to call it Harvest Moon on steroids.
I'd say it's Harvest Moon with the numbers filed off.
Kind of, yeah, it is. But whereas in Harvest Moon, you have 5 girls that you can have relationships with, and you are playing as a male. Harvest Moon, you play as male or female, and there's basically 12 eligible people.
You just said Harvest Moon again? You mean Stardew Valley?
Stardew Valley. Pardon me. I meant Stardew Valley.
It's okay.
Stardew Moon.
Stardew Moon. Yeah. But you basically have a bunch of eligible mates, male or female, and you pick whatever one you pick. It doesn't matter what gender you're playing as, whether you're male or female. And so in Stardew Valley, you can enter these relationships with people, and there's a lot of different cutscenes that happen as you get to know these folks. And one particular character really, you sort of explore a storyline about depression and about this one character dealing with depression. I don't want to give anything away, but I just found that Stardew really opened up a lot of doors in terms of not just who you play as and exploring relationships, but telling some really sort of deep stories that I wasn't expecting to get out of a game that has these cute little sprites that are running around,
Also,
harvesting potatoes and getting whatnot.
yeah. Also, it's Harvest Moon, but cooperative. It has cooperative play. You can
Yes.
Me and Dejah could play together,
Yes.
and that is
But why
wonderful.
would we?
Which I know.
Da 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 da.
Thank you, Dejah.
Welcome, I love you.
But yeah, that was one thing where I almost felt like Stardew felt like a natural progression from Harvest Moon, because it took something, a basis of a game that was fun, and kind of updated it for the current generation that is dealing with these sort of things.
I'm honestly wondering if, after the success of Stardew, if we're going to see a revitalization of Harvest Moon.
I'm wondering that, and part of me feels like I wonder if it's even needed. I feel like Stardew kind of filled that niche.
Let's put it this way. I think let's put it this way. The reason I would like to see Harvest Moon is I always feel like competition in a specific genre can. Thank you, phone, for going off. I found a secret apparently.
I heard that.
I'll turn that phone. I'll turn the phone thing off as soon as I'm done talking about this. But I feel like competition in a specific genre leads to better things. All these improvements Stardew had, well, if Harvest Moon takes that and runs with it, we could see a lot of good things happen that way. I mean, that's a lot of why Final Fantasy ended up the way it did, because it had Dragon Quest in Japan challenging it the entire way. Or why WWE sucks right now, because it doesn't have the WCW anymore to compete with.
Burn.
Burn.
That's real.
Pro wrestling talk.
But even with that, going back to what Brian said, Stardew, I mean, that is an indie title that kind of took these risks and did all these things. But Stardew had a lot of inclusivity in it that we haven't even discussed. Like the idea of different family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
There is a mixed race couple in the game with 2 kids. One kid is from a previous marriage, and then there's a daughter who's mixed. And I said, when's the last time you've seen that? And, the fact that the father in this couple, black man, he's a scientist.
Again with that STEM.
That, yeah, I guess, but alone. Every time you run into him and you make a little dialogue with the guy, he's like, oh, I'm studying this. Oh, like, can I put some bats in this cave on your property so that I can learn how the bats mate?
I've met that character. I've met that character, and yeah, I can see that.
I love Demetrius. But, I just saw little things that this game did, and it wasn't blatant, it wasn't loud about it, but it just sort of naturalized these ideas. There's another family where the passed away and this guy's living with his grandparents. There's a lot of little stories that they put in this game. There's another one where they address a war vet who has PTSD, and they literally put a scene in about that.
It's a town of real people.
And again, it's just this little indie game. I paid $15 for it on the Switch, but I wasn't expecting to get so much richness of character. out of this little game where, again, it's just a farm simulator. And I just think it's a really prime example of inclusivity done right in a game. It should be held up as an example, really.
I was going to say, I feel kind of the same way with Undertale. I mean, how many times do you see a trans or non-binary character in a game, and you have both?
Yeah, and it doesn't hit you over the head with it. It just allows it to be.
Exactly. Now, I wanted to bring up a piece of inclusivity that is basically not there in games at all. I literally can't think of a single character. So we talk about people of color. How many Asian characters can you think of in any game?
Wow, that silence speaks volumes.
Like, the only ones I can think of are in a game like Persona, where the game takes place in Japan, and them being
But they
Asian
have anime syndrome.
means very little in that it's made in that culture. Like, I can't think of one.
I can think of one. Metal Gear Solid, the character of Mei Ling.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'll
I
accept
guess
that.
you could say like, oh, Chun-Li or something, like fighting one too, but
She's Chinese, and yes.
I mean, Street Fighter does have several Asian characters, but Street Fighter is also the behemoth of narrowing down characters into the tropes of where they're from.
Street Fighter is what I should have thought of, because like, my favorite character in there is Asian. I play Sakura. But like that I think we all had those feels.
I mean, that's like
when I asked that
saying-
question, and we all just sat here for a second and went,
I mean, that's like saying there's
yeah.
tons of black characters. Like, look at all the basketball games. Like,
Look
yeah,
at
but
Those aren't characters. Those
Yeah.
are representations of real people.
exactly. That's like, I actually saw somebody making that argument where you have the correct percentage of black people in video games if you take Madden and basketball games, and then it's like, no, that's not having Madden, having black people in Madden, having black people in any of the basketball ones in the NBA. That's not the same as having a protagonist. That's
that
not the
was
same
me
as
telling you about an article I read from 2009 that said if you include those games and characters who are thugs and gang members and whatever, then it's like the same rough percentage of the general population. But again, that's not saying protagonists or any kind of like good representation. That's just saying, well, I mean, they're there, but they're like, again, it's mostly sports games or some guy who's just like, you know, doing the whole criminal stereotype.
And that stereotype, I can tell you from personal experience, is very difficult to deal with and to live with. Especially, I have the story of being the black person who grew up in the suburbs. And that stereotype, and when that was the only image we could see of ourselves in the media, it screws with your head. And you see how it's twisted and used against your own people. You see how it's almost neglecting or taking away the idea of anything else. And it's also taking away, you know, oh, thug this, thug that. It's like, no, some of these are people who are struggling in areas and they can't get out of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why they're living their life.
It's not that their morality is any better or worse. They're just trying to survive.
There is circumstance here, and that can be a very damaging thing. Is when you fall into that hole of stereotype. Yeah. Like another example that I find, and this is outside of video games, but I remember one conversation I found myself having with people was when Black Panther came out. There were some people I remember having conversations with, and they didn't understand why it was such a big deal. And they didn't understand what, like, well, why is this, like, why are people talking about this so much more than other, like, there are plenty of other movies with full black cast and all that. And I said, yeah, but there's something different going on here. Like, this is a mainstream movie that's taking place in Africa. with African royalty.
Yeah.
That's not just like, look, it's huts and dirt roads.
And it's showing like you have one of the smartest people in the Marvel universe, a black woman in STEM who's creating all of this awesome stuff, and
exactly, and
it helps that the movie is fucking amazing. So
the movie's amazing, but you know,
why is it getting so much attention? Well, starting off, it's an amazing movie before you put all the rest of this on top.
But, you know, the thing is, I remember seeing a lot of memes when that movie came out that back to the movie Coming to America from the 1980s. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of the last time I remember seeing a mainstream depiction of African royalty.
Which, by the way, that movie is probably problematic now. I haven't seen it since I was younger, but I loved that movie.
Oh, I love that movie. That movie's a classic. But my point is, we don't see ourselves portrayed as royalty, or haven't in many cases.
Or even
and
positively.
this was a big deal for us. And then on the flip side, you had your quote-unquote villain of the movie, but I think that was one of the most understanding and one of the most relatable villains, because he was telling the story of, no, this is what's going on in America. And he wasn't like, oh, I'm a thug, this and that. It's like, no, there are people over here who are having a really hard time and who cannot get out of poverty. And, you know, that, I mean, his last line in that movie, dear God. But my point is, you know, it started a conversation, but not only that, but because of the way it was depicted, and it was depicted in a mainstream movie, suddenly everybody kind of got a different idea and a different visualization of the psyche behind Black Americans, Africans, and, you know, some of the stuff that we've been talking about sometimes for years. But when you only see portrayals of, I'm a thug and this and that, and I wave my rollies in the air, that message is not getting out there, and it's not getting to everybody, and people aren't understanding what's going on in Black communities and in suburban Black communities, and the whole thing that goes on in there, and the whole other psychic things. It's just, to see different representations is better for everybody, because it opens up the doors and lets us have conversations and lets you understand where we're coming from, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think that's what some people don't get is when they go, well, yes, but like when they do the thugs, when they're showing, especially when it's a good, a well done movie about Black people in poverty, about Black people having a very difficult time, like that can be very real, and that can be very real life. There are people who are struggling, but when that's
like Boys in the Hood
narrative, when that's the only narrative you ever see, and you never see anything outside of that, that's a problem.
That is a problem. It is very much a problem.
Because it's basically just saying, this is what you are, that's all you are, here you go.
And it's not saying those movies and shows or video games or anything, like, it's not that those can't have a place, but let's look at the diversity of people and what they're doing, what they're struggling with, and let's showcase other aspects, other people, other perspectives. And that's a huge part of what Black Panther did. Yeah,
it did. And it unveiled just ideas and things that kind of honestly weren't really being talked about or explored. And bringing this back to video games, I think that's an important thing to bring into games as well. Like bringing back to the San Andreas thing. You know, you have to be careful so that the stereotypes are not just stereotypes, but you also can't completely wipe away what's really going on. It's a balancing act. And I think with the fact that we do have things like Black Panther, I think that we'll see that more in the gaming world too, because these conversations are relatively new, I think. And so even though we may not be seeing, like we said, there's progress, but there's only so much, we might see something in the next year or 2 or 3 where we start to see the catch up from this.
Well, one thing with the sorry, I've lost track of my thought.
I'm sorry. I know, I've been talking.
It's okay. I had the thought in the middle of it. But yeah, I completely lost what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, then I will jump in on your memory lapse there, and
it'll come back.
It'll come back at 3 a.m, and then he'll message me like, Brian, we have to record this.
I've done that once before you. Where I've sent you a thing going, Brian, I meant to mention this in the podcast. I'm so angry with myself.
Everybody get back on Discord now.
Get right now. But it's 3 a.m. I don't care. Anyway.
This wasn't. This was part of what I was going to say. I'm sorry, Brian. Let me say it before I lose it again. But I think a really genius thing with what they did with Black Panther specifically, when we're talking about it, is how they had the perspective T'Challa, and they had the more American perspective, and they kind of put them side by side and didn't say one was better than the other, one was more justified than the other, but they kind of gave you the two perspectives from the two sides and let you as the viewer make that decision.
Or even also, just take in all of that.
Yeah, or understand that there's two sides to it. Because you don't always have to decide who's right or who's wrong. Some of times it's just going, this is how these people feel, and this is what they're going through, and understanding that. And I think that's one thing, speaking as I am a white person, and speaking as white people as a whole, because we know that we are all monolithic groups, and one person can speak for everyone. I feel like one thing we aren't great about is we'll see an inclusive perspective, whether it's from a person of color or somebody who's queer or something like that, and we always feel like we need to not just understand, but we need to put forth our opinion on the thing. And a lot of times, like, it's not that everybody has a perspective on everything, but sometimes you need to just understand what these people are saying and not have to try to make it about you.
Or not try to find the flip side of it, I guess, so to speak. Like, sometimes it's just
the two sides narrative.
Yeah, the two sides narrative. Sometimes you need to just sort of take it for what it is and take it as a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
Instead of a yes and or a no but.
There we go. I'm done with that, Brian. You can go now.
So
you have permission.
No, thank you. Thank you, my liege.
Well, we're all about consent on it.
Yes. So, we're talking about, you're seeing representation and more varied representation. So the question I asked on those episodes years ago is the same question that I have to ask now. It's like, okay, how do we get the varied representation that we so badly want to see? Because we mentioned that one of the potential solutions is have a more diverse pool of developers and writers. For example, we see that in the indie world because we have a diverse selection of developers that are making the games they want to see, and they don't care necessarily so much about financial risks. They don't have a board of shareholders to answer to. So how do we start seeing more of that on the AAA side? So, and also, take some of the more recent societal paradigm shifts. Take the Me Too movement, for example. We are becoming more aware about how really a lot of men are scum. Let's that might be.
Oh, you mean that Gillette ad didn't already?
Oh my god!
To say on that one.
Oh, zing!
I'm ticked off at the douchey dudes who are all pissed off at it. But when I was seeing it on the ad Daily Show or something, I'm looking at it going, I'm not just the whole being weird about being look, we're not part of the problem as a company, even though I don't know. The part that bugged me was when it started saying but something happened and things changed, and I'm like, this is feeling almost blamey. If it wasn't for those darn women in the #MeToo, things would be better or something. I'm like, I don't know. The whole thing rubbed me the wrong way. And I know it's not a podcast to talk about.
I think the meme thing that I loved coming out of this was the Gillette going, "Men can be better," and then the response being, "Not all men."
So it's like we're becoming more and more aware as a society that we need to have more representation in not just video games, but all media that we consume. So, you know, a lot of the reasons why AAA developers haven't been so fully on board, yes, they're making strides, they're making progress, we see that, but, you know, they don't want to take the risk. So it's like, okay, so now it's on us as consumers and maybe future developers to make the change, since we might not be able to count necessarily on the old guard to do it. So what do we do going forward?
Well, to be honest, I think one thing that these conversations are not just, they're not just in the living room anymore. These conversations are happening on an international level now, and it's forcing developers to pay attention to the changing tides. So I think in a way this is already starting to happen. Obviously, because we're sitting here saying that things have happened the past 5 years since the last time we spoke about this. I think it's just a matter of, it's going to have to continue. It's going to be a growing effect.
It's incremental change. I mean,
yeah, it's not going to change overnight.
I mean, let's just, if we look at race relations in America, like, look at everything that happened with Martin Luther King and everything that happened during the Civil Rights Movement, and we're still not where he would have wanted us to be at this point. But you want to know what? We're farther than we were, and every year I like to think we're getting better, and I feel like that's what we're doing in video games. This is a marathon. Well, it would be great if we could just fix it all right now. That's not realistic for the way the industry works. We need to make incremental change forward and keep pushing developers and companies to do the right thing. But I mean, just the fact that we have so many queer and people of color that are now in the industry, it's not enough, but it's better. That itself is going to get their perspectives out there more.
And they can tell those stories from an empathetic place, from a place that is very genuine, rather than trying to adapt that story.
Yeah.
So you're going to get more stories that have an authenticity to them about different groups, different minorities in this country. Maybe race, maybe women, maybe LGBTQ, INA. Is that all of it? Yeah. The more that you have that inclusivity, the more you have people working on these stories who are becoming developers, who are in the industry, and who can tell it from their own experience, the better this is going to get.
All right, one just little like sort of asterisk on that. I agree. I also think though, and I know some people disagree with stuff like this, where they say like you shouldn't write about an experience that isn't your own, which kind of bugs me, just because I'm like, I mean, if you do the research, if you get people to help you, and you listen to them, and you go like, you know, let me hear your story, and then I'm gonna write, you know, use it to get an idea of what it. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
It's collaborative, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, like, white people shouldn't write black characters because they don't know.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, okay, so white writers are only going to write white people? Isn't that kind of defeating the purpose? Like, yes, more black writers, more Latino writers, etc., but then to say, like, stay in your lane?
Yeah,
No, I'm saying this is what some people say.
Yeah, but if a white writer is collaborating with, say, an Asian writer on an Asian character, it's going to come from a different place, I guess is what we're trying to say.
You need to come from a place of respect, and you need to do your research, and you need to treat them like people. And that's, like, Dejah, you and I have had this conversation before, and you know where I fall on this, where I feel absolutely that no matter how many people of color, no matter how many people of any designation we get into an industry, at least at the moment, white people are the majority. So if we're going to have accurate representation, white people are going to have to write some of it. The difference is they have to come at it from a place of respect. They have to come at it from a place of going, this is not my experience, and I need to do my research and know these people and know their experiences and what they're going through if I'm going to do this justice. And you have
it's
to...
not just race, it's gender and sexuality and stuff like that too.
Oh yeah, in any of that. But like you have to understand that if you're writing a major character who is not your experience, and you're going to do that, like as a writer, no matter... No, my main character is not me. There's always going to be something that's different, but you have to understand that whatever is different about them that is not part of your experience, that is something you're going to have to pay extra attention to make sure that you do it right and you do it justice.
Yeah, that's... I was reading an article while you guys were chatting on Polygon. It was... the article was afraid. Why I'm afraid video games will continue to bury its gays. And one of the comments dovetails perfectly with what Ronny just said. One of the commenters was like, said that, quote, I would prefer that creators simply increase their media literacy and put more thought into their decisions around queer characters. Why am I including them? What am I trying to say?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because, I mean, let's put it this way. Now, there's going to be more than one writer for anything. But, Shanna, if you're writing a story, you're probably going to have some white characters somewhere. If I write a story, all of the stories that I'm writing, all have a prominent character of color. They usually have a prominent queer character. Like, whatever you write, you're going to have to write a diversity of characters. It all comes down to making them not one note, making sure that the character is informed by their background. And that's the difference between a stereotype and a character. A stereotype is when their background is all the character is, and there's nothing more to them.
Don't write a Latino character who's like, what's-her-face's 50 Shades of Grey guy, where he just says a couple Spanish words and is super problematic and then runs off.
Or a Latina character that just snaps in your face and is very loud, and that's all the character is.
Yeah, exactly. Like on the flip side, if I were writing a story and it was about a character that, say, comes from England, I would want to know, what's it like when you lived in England? What happened there that informed who you are? I can't just say, oh, well, they came from London, so they drink tea. You have to have some sort of basis of, this is what it's like living there. This is what I went through growing up. This is what the social structure is. There's so much that builds a person, and
Absolutely.
You have to have that to have legitimacy.
And I think here's the thing I think writers need to go into in any medium of this, and that is, if it exactly off of what you said, if I'm writing a British character, I need to go and look into Britain and look into their culture and look into how this character would talk and how this character would act and try to create a real living character from this. But if you go, I'm a white middle class guy and I'm gonna write a queer kid who's living in the inner city, and just go, well, I've seen enough TV, I know what it's like. I'm gonna start writing that right now. And it's like, no, you need to do your research. It's like, just because it's the same country as you doesn't mean you know everything about it. Because honestly, our country is the size of freaking... Our country is so large, and we're talking about America here, because in case we have international viewers, it's so large, it's basically multiple countries if you take a look at different areas, and that's not even counting about the different socioeconomic groups within an area.
There are so many cultural differences within the country. I mean, just living in New York State, there's cultural differences depending on where you go. So to quantify the entire country it's enormous. It's a lot, and it's a lot of difference and a lot of nuances, right down to the weather in your area. I mean,
and a form of diversity I haven't seen in video games, and it's because a lot of video games probably don't deal with it a lot, is highlighting economic diversity. Because I came from a family in poverty. I came from an area where, out of my group of friends on my street, I was the one white kid. Mm-hmm. All of my friends, my friends were Puerto Rican. One of my best friends was black. Like I for a long time I was the one white kid, and like coming from that area of poverty and seeing all of this stuff, I really wish we could see something more of that in video games, because video games, in almost every video game main character in a modern setting either comes from a middle-class family or an ambiguously poor family. And by ambiguously poor, I don't mean actually poor. I mean the kind of, well, we don't have a lot of money, but you can still go to that special school we want to send you to. Or we gotta make some cuts, but like nothing real.
I call that pretty in pink syndrome.
Yeah, or or
the poor characters would be the ones who are the criminal.
Yeah, sitcom poor. How's that?
Sitcom poor.
That's a good term.
But that's all I ever see. So like I understand that not all games like have that as part of the setting. I wouldn't expect it to come up that often, but there are games where I really feel like there's room for that, and you don't really see it, because if you see poor characters, they're almost always going to be troublemakers or drug addicts.
A homeless NPC.
Yeah. So that was one I wanted to bring up. But
that's a good point, because sometimes when you have characters who are in poverty, traditionally they have been portrayed as a cautionary tale. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, you do this,
morally bad choice.
Yeah, they did a bad thing. They chose drugs and now they're poor, something like that. And poverty is systemic in this country. There's a lot of people in this country who are, I mean, like it's a very dangerous theme to be putting out into the world when you use that theme. Because
I really appreciated the homeless woman in Life is Strange.
Oh yeah.
And how they portrayed her, where she was a real person. And honestly, she was probably one of the few genuinely good people in the entire thing.
I was about to say. I saved her hardcore.
But, like, for me, like, from what I just said, like, I came from a background where I was raised with diversity around me. And I didn't realize how special that was until I reached high school. Because it was just my life. Like, my best friend, Leon, is a black kid. And Josh and Jay are Puerto Rican, and we're hanging out every day, and they're my best friends. And there's, like, to me, there was nothing weird until I got to high school, and that's when I realized most people weren't raised this way, and because of that, a lot of people weren't aware of a lot of this stuff.
We live in the same town, and I grew up around a lot of white people.
Yeah. And it's
I knew one mixed race girl. That was it.
Yeah. And it's like I saw a lot of implicit racism in high school with people who, honestly, like, at the time I went, they should know better, but looking back on it, I go, no, they didn't know better because they never dealt with any of these people, and their parents never taught them anything about it.
You are absolutely right.
Yeah, and I called a lot of people out at the time, and honestly, I feel like I might have been a little meaner than I should have been at the time, because I didn't understand that, but, like, I tried to open some eyes back then, but it's like, representation will do a lot to help.
It will do a lot to help. I can speak to this from a very personal place. I mean, Brian, what would you say was the breakdown of our school?
Everyone had more money than me. basically.
And me too.
Yeah.
And we were fine. Like, we were, I guess middle class. I don't know. But I remember kind of having this as a kid, and it's a very small thing, but it's something that speaks volumes. I was the little black girl with the braids in her hair. And I got teased mercilessly growing up. And I remember one time, like, I came home and I, like, kind of said something to my mom about it, and she kind of muttered something about, like, oh, that's because, like, they're not taught to understand. And I said, what? And she's like, nothing. But, it was just, like, the smallest thing, but it resonated with me as I got older. Like, no one taught some of the other kids around me that, no, my hair doesn't straight and blonde. It grows out thick and wavy, and it's part of who I am. And the best way for my mother to do my hair without me getting it into a gnarled mess when I'm running around on, on swings and in the dirt and everything was to put it in braids.
Now imagine cute little Shanna with braids, and it sounds adorable.
I had like all the little braids in my hair. But that was like a thing. And I remember like, kind of thinking about that growing up. I'm like, yeah, you would see all of the, say, Pantene commercials with the straight hair flying back and forth. You didn't see anybody with braided hair in those commercials. And I just had a point and I lost it.
Nowadays,
but my point is, I got it back. I got it back. But talking about representation, as I was a kid, and I remember one of the biggest things for me, and it's so stupid and so small, but one of the most poignant things for me was in the Power Rangers, when suddenly the Yellow Ranger was a black girl with braids.
Yes.
And not much longer, Brandy, a black girl with braids, starts coming out with music, and I said, that's me, I exist. And it may seem so small, but it can be so big when you don't see yourself anywhere in the media zeitgeist. And that is something that when it's ported over to the video game world, that's another place where we can see ourselves represented and know, oh, hey, there we are. And then on top of that, hey, rest of the world, look, we exist. And this is our story, and this is why we are the way we are.
I remember reading something, I don't know if it was an interview or just a quote that I had seen from him, but I remember a couple of years ago, before he like really, really hit it big, Donald Glover was talking about growing up as a kid and reading comic books and stuff, and always kind of going, I think it was talking about Spider-Man, and I think it was coming back to like Miles as a character, but how he was like, I wasn't really seeing people looked like me, and
which Miles is such a good
not? Like, I was a black nerd in the suburbs or wherever he lived at the time. Don't quote me on that. I don't forget where he lived, but so like, why? Like, am I the only like nerd of color? What's going on here? Kind of thing. So,
well, the one thing I wanted
the thing that happens with that is when they're just going back to what I was saying, when there is no representation like that. Going back to like saying the shampoo commercial, maybe if there was more commercials on at that time that said, hey, here's this black hair care product and this is what we have to use because our hair is different, maybe more people would be informed of the fact that I had different hair because I'm culturally different. That was the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was about to go off of your thing.
I always used to say, I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, you go ahead. It was your point.
I always used to say that sometimes it feels like it's not, racism isn't exactly it. Sometimes it's ignorance.
Yeah.
The fact that people aren't informed of other cultural differences, so that sort of becomes something that is racism.
Let me say...
It's just sort of the institutional thing.
Yeah.
Going off of exactly what you said, and it was the point you're making, is the other side of representation. Like, most of what we've talked about is how representation's awesome because you see yourself in it, and you see yourself represented, and you see yourself on the screen, and you go, I can be this too, and all of this. And that's one important side of representation. The other side of it is showing people who aren't you what your experience is like, and showing like the struggles that you go through, whether we're talking about a black character or a queer character or a woman or whatever it is that's not you. It allows you to experience a little bit of that and give you a little bit of empathy in a way that few things do, because yes, there's movie and TV, but games put you in that person's shoes, and they make you experience it actively, and that can really give you a feeling of empathy and understanding that you don't get in other media. And I think that is a huge important part of representation in dispelling the ignorance of racism, not the active racism, the implicit racism of not understanding the experience other people are going through and doing ignorant things because of that.
You're absolutely right. I mean, in that gaming puts you in somebody else's shoes. It does allow you to experience a life that you wouldn't necessarily experience, and it does have a very much more personal, I think, effect in gaming, because you're actively taking on whatever the storyline is or whatever, rather than passively. So you're right about that.
I mean, that's one of the greatest things about video games, is that you can immerse yourself in it. It's not something like a movie where you're watching the action. Just the action of playing a video game and, making choices and button presses and molding your character as you see fit. I mean, that's one of the greatest things about it. So do we have any more things we would like to say on this topic before I put this to bed?
I think that we're probably going to come back to this topic again in another 5 years, and hopefully we're going to be a little farther along in representation than we are right now, and we'll be able to discuss this other big, monumental game that had this powerful, pansexual woman of color who is this badass warrior, takes over the country and dominates everyone, and that's going to be our new Lord and Savior.
And she's also polyamorous.
I was trying to add a bunch of things in there, but I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. I mean, I knew where you were going with that. That's I'm hoping. It's like I for one welcome our new overlords. Anyone else? Are we good?
I got nothing.
I think we just need to keep going the way we're going. I think we're going in a good direction. I definitely feel like we're a lot further than we were in a relatively short amount of time. And I think the community, they're always going to hold developers accountable for one thing or another. So it's just a matter of seeing what happens. But I think right now we're in a good place, and we'll just hope, like Ronny said, that 5 years from now we'll be talking about the next game.
I will say I think that the other communities that we've been talking about in diversity could learn a lot from the Black community and how they have taken developers to task, and how they've pushed for representation, and how they've honestly in a lot of ways led the charge towards all of this. Like, I think that's, if you take a look at a lot of what led to all of this, I see a lot of Black people who are leading that charge.
Sometimes I think the LGBTQ community has kind of done it, but it's been too focused on relationship stuff, and then that's kind of where we've gotten the queer baiting thing from. So I don't know exactly how the conversation's going to have to change to go, can we have this, but either you don't try to kill one off to make it some big dramatic thing, or they don't have to have a relationship in it. It can just be who they are as part of their identity, or I'm not entirely sure where it's going to go, but I mean, it's not like they haven't been saying anything.
No, you're right on that too, because there's more to representing somebody from the LGBT community than just make sure that they can get with the person they want to get with at the end of the game. There's a lot more inherent to who they are as a person than that. So
there's a lot more to sexuality than just sex.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it solves the problem by just putting in, oh look, here's your gay character, and he got a boyfriend. The end. Bye. It's like, No, he has a story too. You need to tell his story too, and what it was like for him. But again, I think we're heading in a right direction, and that those doors are opening up. So
There definitely has been some progress in the last 5 years. Let's continue to have it. All right. So if any of you out there on the wide world of the internet have any questions, comments, thoughts on this episode or any other episode of downloadable content, you can let us know. dlcpodcast.com. Click on the feedback button. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you want to be in on an episode or give us ideas for future episodes. And as always, every single episode can be found on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, and dlcpodcast.com. So it is all there for you. And all it remains for me to do is to thank Ronny, Shanna, and Dejah for being on this episode with me. Some very good discussion came about. So thank you, lovely people, for joining in. And on that fun note, I am Brian. Have a good one, everybody.